Hi guys, welcome to our next session on the person and work of Jesus Christ. I'm going to carry on from where we were last time, and I'm going to quickly pull up my notes so we can follow in the slideshow. So we were talking about the life of Jesus Christ, his life on earth according to the Gospels. Jesus launched his ministry in Jerusalem, but they rejected him, and that's the time when they killed John the Baptist. So Jesus sets up his headquarters in Capernaum in Galilee. It's very interesting that most of the miracles of Jesus are done from there. So he kind of sets up a base, and from there he goes on a number of ministry trips, a number of missionary tours. That, interestingly, is where most of the miracles of Jesus takes place. Now, Galilee was an ideal place for a base for training, and those of you who are involved with New Covenant Ministries, you'll know that one of our very strong values is having base churches. And I remember being questioned by a professor once about how can I back up the whole thing of base churches. And I got to study the life of Jesus. So the pattern is starts with Jesus when he sets up this base, and for 3 years he's with his disciples. He's discipling them, he's training them, he's building relationship with them, and then of course they go on all these trips, and that of course is where many of the miracles have taken place. Now, Ian McKellar, he points out that Galilee had many traders and Gentiles passing through and was open to new ideas. The disciples would meet people from many different nationalities, which would prepare them for their quest to go into all the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's, when you think about it, that's really what happened. And I prepared this this diagram many years ago. I did a little study on kind of plotting all the miracles of Jesus. So there we have Galilee and all the little towns around it: Capernaum, Gennesaret, Bethsaida, Magdala, Tiberias. And you'll see it goes out, the circles go out from there to places like Cana, Nazareth, Nain, Gadara, Bethany, and then it goes right out to Megiddo and so on. So have a look at the cluster of the towns. It's quite interesting. So in a radius of approximately 10 kilometers, you've got Sharazim, Gennesaret, and Bethsaida. And then in a 20-kilometer radius, you've got Hippos, Tiberias, Magdala, Hazor, and Gadara. You'll remember the very famous story of the monarch at Gadara. Then in a 35-kilometer radius, there was Nazareth, Nain, and Cana. And then in a 45-kilometer radius, we have Caeserea Philippi, Megiddo, St. Paulus, and Pella. So before we go into the miracles, just to mention them, the question is, what is a miracle? And a miracle is when the supernatural power of God breaks into a situation on earth. It is the power of God's divine intervention in the lives of people with miraculous healing, getting eyesight back, hearing back, and even, I suppose, a breakthrough in people's lives with being heavily demonized. But it's a miracle is when God breaks through with his power, which kind of defies all natural logic. So this is a number of famous miracles take place. The healing of Jairus' daughter, the walking on the water takes place there, the healing of Peter's mother-in-law, the healing of the paralytic, the healing of the centurion's son, the healing of the demoniacs. And there are a couple of those. There's the healing of 2 blind men, the feeding of the 5,000, the turning water into wine in Cana, and the widow's son raised, and that was in Nain. Remember the situation? Jesus was walking with his disciples, and they kind of bumped into a funeral procession, and Jesus had compassion on the widow, and he raised her son. There's the healing of the Canaanite woman and the centurion servant, and the calming of the sea, also a major miracle that took place on the very sea of Galilee. Remember also the woman with the flow of blood. She said, if I could just touch his garment, I'll be healed. So those are all major miracles, and they all happened in that particular location, in those radiuses that I showed you. Quite wonderful just to see how a base operated in the life of Jesus with his disciples as he poured his life into them and as he prepared them for their own ministry trips. Now, we want to have a look at the life of Jesus according to the Gospels. So at the end of the first tour in Galilee, there was a rising hostility against Jesus, and you can read about that in Mark chapter 3. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So from quite early on in the ministry of Jesus, there was hostility from the Pharisees and from the religious leaders. And so Jesus goes on a second missionary tour around Galilee, and he preaches his famous Sermon on the Mount, and we'll touch on that as well in a little while. And then he appoints his 12, and then he takes a break and keeps quiet for a while. Excuse me. Then we come to what we call a watershed moment. It was like a real high point in the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. And it took place at a place called Caeserea Philippi. So when Jesus was with his disciples, he gave them a question. It says, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So it's a very, very interesting time. And by the way, you can see the kind of the teaching manner of Jesus, how he would ask questions and how he would draw things out of people. So now this is a very critical moment in the disciples' walk with Jesus Christ. Very critical moment in the time of his ministry. And so he asks them this question, who do people say I am? So they've heard a lot of things. And so they say, well, it's some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah. Then he says, but who do you say that I am? And here's this famous reply from Peter, the most unsuspecting guy. He's always putting his foot in his mouth, and he's always blundering, and he's always jumping the gun. But Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah. Remember I said Christ is the Greek word Christos. That means the anointed one. You are the anointed one. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And if you go on to read that, you'll see how Jesus stops and he says, sure, Peter, blessed are you. You've really heard from God, because flesh and blood could not have revealed this to you. So there's this amazing aha moment when Peter gets this breakthrough in the spirit. He gets this insight, and he sees that this is the Son of God. The sad part of that story is that Jesus then goes on to tell him, I'm going to die, I'm going to give my life, I'm going to be killed, and I'm giving my life for the sake of saving people. Peter turns around and he says, no, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And that's where we see another insight into the personality and character of Jesus. He turned on Peter, his friend, and he said to him, Satan, get behind me. Now listen to this. He says, because you think as men think, not as God thinks. And so the sad part is the disciples still don't realize that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the divine Messiah. And from that time on, Jesus began to explain that he would die in Jerusalem and then he would be resurrected. The sad part is that disciples refuse to believe what Jesus says. And you know, the amazing thing is, right up to the death of Jesus, they still struggled with this. And even at the resurrection, they still battled to absorb the fact that Jesus, everything he said about himself, came to pass, it came true. And I think I shared with you about the journey on the Emmaus Road and how he unfolds the scriptures and he reminds him all that was to happen to him. And then, of course, as the resurrected Lord, he spends about 6 weeks appearing to them in different places at different times and helping them to understand and absorb the reality of the resurrection. So this was an incredible build-up. But the disciples, even from this personal disclosure moment when Jesus said, actually, I am the Messiah, and this is what's going to happen to me, they still struggled to come to terms with it. And so Jesus then stays in Galilee, but without a settled base, and he continues moving around and going on these various trips. Okay, my time's up, and I'll carry on in the next session. I hope that your hearts are being stirred about this wonderful story of Jesus Christ, and we're going to dig deeper and deeper into his life, and hopefully we're going to have our whole walk of faith wonderfully enlarged and blessed as we make this study together. So God bless you. I'll see you next time.